church. John chapter 5, if you would please. Tom Buck, thank you for what you did up here. That was, sorry kids, but that was good stuff.
Yeah.
Next slide. Wow, this is, I've been kind of on a roller coaster ride with this sermon. I'll just have to tell you. I've been researching this pool of Bethesda for quite a while. In fact, those of you who are in Wednesday night assembly back probably 3 or 4 weeks ago were subjected to my my ramblings on the subject. And I'm always in a good mood after I come across a story where the scholars said, well, the Bible missed it here because there never was ever in the whole history of Jerusalem a pool called the Pool of Bethesda, and then somebody comes across in an archaeological dig something that doesn't make any sense, and they start looking at it a little bit deeper, and then they say, well, you know what, I think there was a pool here. And then so that, by the way, that is the story of the Pool of Bethesda. Up until the 1800s, the biblical scholars all kind of scoffed at the idea that there was a pool called the Pool of Bethesda, or in Aramaic it means house of mercy, which is interesting. When you get the whole picture of what's going on there, but nevertheless, archaeological dig in the 1800s came across this thing, and when they started investigating it, they realized that it was the remains of a pool, and but they didn't really finish the excavation, and they only found one piece of this pool. And then many years later, another archaeological dig was working in the same spot, and they found a second pool. And so John, by the way, mentions in his narrative that it was, do you guys remember how many porches, or what we would call a colonnade, where you've got columns supporting kind of a roof structure? John says there were 5. And why? I mean, John doesn't do this very often, right? But he says, oh, and by the way, there were 5 colonnades, or 5 porches, which is intriguing to me, why John would do that. Well, anyway, as they began to dig, they found this second pool, and they began to count. Looks like 1, 2, 3, 4. Looks like 5 porches. Wow. So there's, by the way, archaeological stuff all over the place. Where these surprised archaeologists said, looks like it's just like the Bible said. So, anyway, I wanted to just kind of set the stage first of all. But probably the most important thing, though, and I know this isn't in the Bible, okay? I get that, but I think it gives us a clue as to what was going on in this narrative. So right here, in that same archaeological dig, they came across a temple that dated back to the Pool of Bethesda. And it was a temple that was built right beside the Pool of Bethesda, and it was to Asclepius, the Greek god of healing. In fact, if you look at the picture here, he's got the snake around the pole, which you'll recognize if you work anywhere close to or observant of anything in the medical world. The medical world is quite fond of snake wrapped around a pole. And that comes from a couple of places, of course. The narrative of Moses in the wilderness, and also this fellow Asclepius, who was the god of healing. So, all of that kind of boring stuff, unless you're like me and geek out on that kind of thing. Oh, by the way, the pool of Bethesda. So in my mind, I had this kind of this picture, before I started researching the pool. I had in my mind this maybe a pool about the size of 4 hot tubs. And then there's bubbles coming up, and so everybody's diving in to try to get into the pool. That is not the case. It was, I got right here, it was 54 feet deep. So just, you do the math. So when we've, the Chosen, when they've got the people scrambling to get in the water, here's the thing. There was some faith involved in getting into the water, especially if you were an invalid, because 54 feet deep is a long way down. I don't know if you guys have done the math, and then the thing, that this pool that they discovered was 160 feet by 314 feet long. So, yeah. So, and then just kind of setting the stage, there's this religious festival going on. And I want to underscore this because I think it's important to the narrative. The folks that were there, and we'll read the narrative here in just a minute, but the folks that were scrambling to get in the water, these are not church-going religious Jews, probably. These are people who have given up on the God of the Jews and have come to get some healing from Asclepius, probably. The Bible doesn't say that, but that's my take on the situation. Next slide. So this is a picture of that archaeological dig, and I've spent hours trying to figure out where stuff is there, and I got no clue. But anyway, that's a picture of the archaeological dig. But next slide. So John's going to talk about the sheep gate. This right here is the sheep gate. It's also called the lion's gate. And the sheep that were coming in to be sacrificed in the temple, right over here on your far left, they came in through the sheep gate. And this is the pool of Bethesda. In scale, it is, so, and there's 5 colonnades. I think probably, though nobody knows, there's 1, 2, 3, and then 4, 5. Next slide. So this is a picture from inside, looking out. The fortress of Antonia would be towering over this thing. I think there's one more picture of the inside of, maybe, next slide, yeah. Basically, but there would have been hundreds of people in here, especially in view of the size of this thing, and the fact that there is this urban legend that I think that's the reason that people thought, and I spent quite a bit of time researching, what about the water stirring and people thinking that if they got in it, be the first one. So basically it was a healing lottery, right? As soon as the bubbles started coming up, for whatever reason, everybody jumped in, and the first guy in, of course, gets healed. I think it was an urban legend. I don't think that was, legitimately something that was happening. I think it's stuff that had sprung up around, and an attempt to kind of join the Greek healing, or the Greek mythology with the Jewish worldview. All right, next slide. So, here's what I thought about preaching and decided not to. Those of you who know that about my sermons, if I have a slide like this, it's going to be a long day. But I'll do it really quick. I thought about, because. And I want to use myself as an example. This was a very unhealthy process for me, because looking at this narrative, I started thinking about all of the ways that I could apply this. I'm going to say this again. I started thinking about all the ways that I could apply this. So I thought about preaching on the fact that they were looking in the wrong place for healing. Boy, that sounds like a good sermon right there. They were looking in the wrong place for healing. I thought I'd maybe, spend some time beating up on the goofy, legalistic Sabbath police who completely missed the fact that Jehovah's standing right beside them and are right there in their presence, and they're worried about a guy carrying a mattress, right? That sounded like a really good sermon. And then I thought, well, sometimes, we don't really want to get well. We like holding on to whatever it is that ails us, our problems, because like the children of Israel in Egypt, and God takes them out of Egypt into the wilderness, and they say, do you guys remember, after they'd been out in the wilderness just a short amount of time, they said, hey, Mr. Moses, sir, could we go back to Egypt, because at least we had 3 square meals a day. You guys remember that? So, that would have been a good sermon. And then I thought, well, God and urban legends, that'd be a pretty cool thing to preach on. And the fact that these folks that were coming to this pool were probably not really devout Jewish people. And I thought, well, man, a sermon on being a secular Christian might be a good. And then all of those things came to mind, and then it dawned on me that something was just really itching. And it dawned on me, I'm missing something here. And what I'm missing is that's not what this passage is about. I can, and by the way, this is the struggle when you prepare material to share with God's people. The struggle is that we first of all, stay in the context. I should have put this on the slide. Stay in the context. Take off the filters. All of the things that you need that passage to say, or want that passage to say, or the people that you want it to address. And this thing too. If you don't hear anything else I say today, hear this. You've got to leave room for mystery in your reading of the text, because this passage we're going to look at here, it's going to raise a whole lot more questions than it's going to answer. And there is this desire for us, because we're so focused on being intellectual and data-driven, and we don't like anything that's mysterious. Well, we don't mind a mystery as long as, at the end of the story we've solved the mystery, right? Sabrina's always watching these true crime, episodes on TV. She just thinks that's so cool. And I think probably, she would have made a good detective. She's just all about, detecting stuff, right? So once in a while she'll get me to sit down and watch one of these with her, and about half of them end with the mystery not being solved. I think, what, that producer ought to just be fired. I I go to bed and I'm just aggravated beyond belief that they, why tell the story if you're not going to solve the mystery? Yeah, well, that comes out of our Western way of thinking, and it is not altogether healthy when it comes to looking at the Scriptures. So here we are, John chapter 5. Sometime later, Jesus went up to Jerusalem for one of the Jewish festivals, and there is in Jerusalem, near the sheep gate, a pool which in Aramaic is called Bethesda. Beth is the word for house. Bethesda, the word for mercy. So the house of mercy. And which is surrounded by 5 covered colonnades. Here a great number of disabled people used to lie. The blind, the lame, the paralyzed. One who was there had been an invalid for 38 years. Just to put it in context, in my research on this, do you guys know what the average life expectancy of a Hebrew male in that period of time was?
35.
It was like 35 years. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So this guy was old. That's kind of a joke, but you guys aren't laughing, so. Just kind of, one of the kids in class this morning, made some statement about 60 years old and that being old. And I was, oh man, it's just wounded. Just, somebody get that knife. I'm just kidding. Sort of. So, when Jesus saw this guy, 38 years he'd been, and by the way, the Bible typically, if a person was born this way, will say, and they were born this way. But in this case, so who knows? When Jesus saw him lying there and learned, I find that intriguing. It's like Jesus investigated, who is this guy and what's going on there? Or maybe God revealed it to him. I don't know how that worked out. But he learned that he had been in this condition for a long time, and he asked him, do you want to get well? Well, I will tell you, if you just jump on YouTube and do healing at Pool of Bethesda and watch several of the sermons, they're all going to say this. Well, not everybody wants to get healed. Not everybody. I mean, we like holding on to our our crutches and our blah blah blah. I mean, is that really what John's doing here? I mean, is that really what Jesus is doing here? And maybe, because John just doesn't say. But again, be careful that we're not making this out to be something that we want it to be. Now, by the way, this guy, he's not a very noble type individual. I mean, if you really read this in the context, this guy is a whiner, he's an excuse maker. When he is confronted for hauling his mattress around, you guys remember what he does? He says, well, the guy that healed me told me to. He's just, yeah. And then, when Jesus confronts him in the temple courtyard, then after that conversation, the guy runs off and tells the Jewish leaders, it was that guy over there that healed me, So he's not the noble character that that would make for a good story. And by the way, I want to finish this, and then I've got some questions, and then we'll look at the next couple of slides quickly. Sir, the invalid said, I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred. While I am trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. And then Jesus said to him, get up, pick up your mat, and walk. And at once, the man was cured, and he picked up his mat, and he walked. The day on which this took place was a Sabbath, and so the Jewish leaders said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath. So somebody blows a whistle, hey, dude with a mattress, it's the Sabbath, law forbids you to carry your mat. And by the way, there's actually a tract written by a Jewish rabbi dealing with the fact that it's okay to carry a person on a bed on the Sabbath day. But you can't carry a bed without a person on it on the Sabbath day. No kidding. No kidding. Sure, good thing we're not all legalistic and stuff these days, right? I mean, isn't that just ridiculous? There's another sermon I could have preached. But he replied, the man who made me well, that guy, said to me, pick up your mat and walk. And so they asked, who is this fellow who told you to pick up your mat and walk? And the man said, and the man who was healed had no idea who it was. For Jesus had slipped away. Isn't that just like him? To just swoop in, do something really awesome, and then disappear before anybody gets credit. Later, Jesus found him at the temple, and he said to him, see, you're well again. And then, I love this. And by the way, it's going to create a lot of questions. Stop sinning or something worse may happen to you. What is he talking about? Let me tell you. Look at me. You need to hear this. Why would he say, stop sinning or something worse will happen to you? I have no idea. None. It's a mystery. Just let it be a mystery. It's okay. I mean, I think it probably has to do with the fact that he was bathing in a pool that was probably dedicated to the Greek god of healing. That's my thinking on the subject, but I don't know. And John doesn't tell us. And it doesn't matter. Jesus is just saying, hey, part of my concern for your life is, part of me helping you thrive is, you got to let go of the stuff that is killing you. That's called repentance. The man went away and he told the Jewish leaders that it was Jesus who had made him well. I love that. He doesn't go tell his friends. He goes and tattles. So, here we are. Just kind of a conclusion. By the way, I'm just going to say this. It's easy for us to sit in judgment of this rascal. Right? I mean, he's a whiner. He's a complainer. He's kind of a victim. He's, I'm just going to tell you, it's easy for us. It is easy for us. Who were raised in a Christian home or who were confronted at some point and brought to the Lord, it's easy for us to think that had we been born in the back streets of South Chicago, that we would be as noble as we are today. But the truth of the matter is, that's just silly talk. In fact, wouldn't Paul say this in 1 Corinthians? To the well-heeled, intellectually fantastic Corinthians, wouldn't Paul just say, what do you have that God didn't give you? Right? And if he gave it to you, then why are you all puffed up and proud about it? Right? Your salvation, you didn't invent that. In fact, the majority of us, and I won't ask you to raise your hands, but the majority of us in here were raised in a Christian home. Well, I don't know, maybe that's not the case. But I know I was. I didn't create my worldview. My mom and dad and the teachers at 14th and Main Church of Christ. And, my grandmom and my granddad who preached for 54 years. They all created my worldview. I didn't invent this. So sure, I can sit here and say, well, the guy's a complainer, he's a whiner, he's tattling on Jesus. But the cool thing is, Jesus didn't do that, right? Now here's the big question. John 20 verse 30, I'm almost done. John 20 verse 30 says this. This is the conclusion of the Gospel of John. John says, hey, there are so many other things, and I'm going to paraphrase this. There are so many other things that I could have put in this book. You remember how many he said there were? He said, well, the truth of the matter is, if I put them all in a book, the whole world would not be big enough to contain the books, right? And then he says, but the things that I've written in this book, I've written so that you might believe in Jesus. And that believing, you may be saved. So, John had this huge mass of information about wonderful things that Jesus did, and he scaled it all down to what we have in these 21 chapters of the Gospel of John. Why in the world did he choose this one to tell about this sniveling, whining victim, secular Jew? Well, the answer to that question, I think, if you just stay in the context, is down in verse 16. So because Jesus was doing these things on the Sabbath, the Jewish leaders began to persecute him. I love this statement. I have read through this 1,000,000 times maybe, and I've never seen this one little statement in his defense. Jesus stands up in his own defense, and he says to them, now watch what he says. My Father. So what are they complaining about? They're complaining about the fact that Jesus is working on the Sabbath day, and he's conning people into working on the Sabbath day. And so the idea is that we're not supposed to work on the Sabbath day. And Jesus says, well, my Father works on the Sabbath day. What? Who's your Father? Oh, Jehovah. Now he's got their attention, right? He says, my Father, he just keeps on working. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, or Saturday. Whether you see it or not. Why did he choose this guy? I have no idea. But the important thing is, and this is the way God works, right? Why did he choose John Dennis? Why did he choose Brad Curtis? I don't know. You're not ever going to know till you get to the other side. But the truth is, God's at work on everyone, isn't he? Wouldn't Peter say that he would that all should be saved? That everyone should come to repentance? Right? In his defense, Jesus said, my Father is always at work to this very day, and I too am working. For this reason, they tried all the more to kill him. Not only he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making himself equal to God. One of the things that I love about the Gospels is, depending on the Gospel writer, Matthew and Mark, for instance, they seem to disagree on how clueless the disciples were. And if you pay attention as you read through Matthew and then you line it up with a read through Mark, you'll see, for instance, when they're in the boat and Jesus is talking about leaven, and he's just fed the 5,000, and they're in the boat, and Jesus is talking about this idea of leaven and how it works through the dough. You guys remember what the disciples did with that? You know, Jesus is just talking to them about the way leaven works, right? And one of them says to the other one, "It's because we didn't bring lunch." Right? You know? Oh man, we forgot to bring lunch. Well, the other gospel, and I can't remember which one it is now, but I love this. Matthew and Mark, you compare those two. One of them, you know, the disciples' response is, "Hey, it's because we didn't bring lunch." The other one says, and then they understood. I just love this idea that God is at work. He's at work in the lives of everyone. He's at work in the lives of the people who live across the street from you, the people that you think are morally bankrupt, and you think, you know, well, I'm a whole lot, closer to God than. Watch out. I mean, we do that sometimes. We get a little arrogant. We were talking about that in our Bible class this morning. Be careful. Be careful that you don't become spiritually elite, arrogant. I mean, that's Pharisee territory right there. The reason that you are where you are today, the reason that you are who you are today, has nothing to do with your intelligence and everything to do with God silently and quietly at work behind the scenes, chiseling away on you. Some of you have got some things you need to let go of. That's a fact. Jesus would say that, right, to the man that we're talking about. But, by the way, he tacked it on at the end of the sermon. He meets him in the temple courtyard and he says, "Oh, hey, by the way, just to wrap this up." Same thing he would say, wouldn't it? Right? To the woman caught in adultery. I don't condemn you, but hey, you got to go stop your sin. You got to let go of this. You're holding on, many of us are holding on to things that are preventing you from God moving you to the next level. And in order to get there, you got to let go. Sometimes he hits you hard enough, wounds you deep enough, 38 years laying by a pool, to knock loose the stuff you're holding on to that's keeping him from getting you where you need to be. If there's anything we can do to help you, please don't leave without letting us know. We'll pray with you, study with you, whatever.